demonic
terrifying
Centauri.
Centauri.
Oh,
Yes.
she's evil.
And talented.
She is such a perfect, Gileadian wife.
Oh God, yes.
We all know the truth. More connects us than separates us. But in times of crisis, the wise build bridges, while the foolish build barriers.
You raise walls, I destroy them. Let's see who prevails.
Just because something works doesn't mean that it cannot be improved.
I say we take off and nuke the entire site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure.
Allow my sword to join you in the fight against evil.
The world needs us to chase dreams.
We have to dedicate ourselves each and every single day to this fight because I can't do it alone.
You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
Welcome to Screen Scouts, a magic new episode.
Babylon 5, episodes 9 through 12, but I've never got past 1.
I'm Sean.
I'm Paul.
I'm Mike.
And obviously we are here today to talk about episodes 9 through 12, as suggested by Paul, about Babylon 5 Season 3. We are continuing our rewatch, and so I don't know if we need to do anything more, but just get started.
Yeah, we can we can take turns reading the overview from Lurker's Guide and dig into the episodes. So I'll start with Point of No Return, because I have it
Do
right
it,
up
Paul.
there. Point of No Return, Episode 9, Season 3 of Babylon 5. As the Earth Alliance plunges towards civil war, internal strife threatens to shatter the command structure of Babylon 5. Zack's loyalties are put to the test when the Night Watcher is ordered to take over station security. Londo receives another glimpse of his destiny. Majel Barrett as Lady Morella, Marshall Teague as Talon.
So yeah, this picks up from where episode 8 stopped, because 8 through 10 of this season are really a bam 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 triptych, moving to a big pivot point with episode 11. So just before we started recording, we were kind of catching each other up and reminding one another on okay, which one, where are we in 9? Because these really flow together, and I think it's a great testament to the show's strength that it's able to reach this point of really strong forward momentum and fluidity.
This is a very early example as far as series go in history. Now we kind of take that for granted, where episodes should flow together, and we expect that sort of through line as part and parcel. But back then, this was something new and relatively rare in series television to actually have episodes come together like that in the meld. And it's nice to see the prototype, the first form of how this works. And these 3 episodes, I do agree with you, Mike, really do form together as a mini Voltron.
Because it's not even talked about as a part 1 of 3. These are just 3 named episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And the show does do part 1, part 2 on occasion, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, there's a couple of part 1s and part 2. War Without End comes to mind. A few others.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Sean, how'd this one work for you, being a first time through?
This one I actually quite enjoyed, because I like to finally see all of this Night Watch stuff really finally have a kind of payoff of sorts, because the big question that's been going on is we get all this. We had Night Watch before, and it was always kind of there, but sort of in the background. But this whole season has been sort of building it up in this really nefarious and messed up way, right? In the last cycle of episodes we did, we had this figure who shows up to sort of teach Sheridan how to be diplomatic. Quote, I'm doing scare quotes as though anyone can see that. And then, of course, she just disappears. In this episode, we finally get to see sort of Earth Alliance really start to pull all the strings together, which I think is important, as Mike, you mentioned, right? Because it's connected into this sort of triptych of episodes, which really explodes in the episode following it. But this episode really feels like it's smack dab in the middle. I mean, literally it is, but in the sense that from a narrative perspective, we're sort of having the dominoes fall into place. And we recognize that this is going to lead to increasingly more horrific things that are to come. And so this episode, I felt like it really, really worked from a narrative perspective with just what happens and how it is resolved. It feels like a victory for the characters, but it also feels like it's almost like a Pyrrhic victory in a way.
Yeah, like taking a stand here is not something that's going to come without a cost, and they all know it, and that it's going to come quickly.
I mean, they feel like they just get away with, for those that have not watched the episode, right? They effectively trick Nightwatch into showing up in this like airlock, and then they lock them all in there, and they're basically like, "We'll send you home, or you can just stay in there for a while and like smell the pee." And it feels like they only get it by the skin of their pants, because one of the biggest questions that has been raised numerous episodes now is where Zach sits in all of this. And that's the big question for me, was I never quite knew if I'm supposed to trust Zach. I want to, because he seems like such a nice dude. And he has these moments with the Nightwatch where he's just sort of like, this all seems kind of crazy, guys, including in this episode. He sort of just thinks like, where does this end? It just seems like it's getting worse and worse, but he still toes the line. And so it was really interesting to see his character have his moment where he really has to finally decide, is he going to continue down this path, or is he going to be like, you know what, this is not acceptable, I'm going to change. And he makes, of course, the choice that we all like because it helps the heroes.
Although we don't see him as much, we only see a little bit of him before with the previous episode, and we also see him a little bit in this trip. Lieutenant Corwin's kind of like Zach that way. He's like, will Lieutenant Corwin go with our heroes, or will he oppose them, sort of question. And he and Zach are kind of like two of a pair that way, although Zach is a viewpoint character much more than Lieutenant Corwin. Corwin mostly just gets reactions in a little bit. He doesn't get top billing. He's not Jeff Conaway, so, you know.
Right.
But it's the same sort of niche. It's like, you have everyone on the top is on board, but what about the people below? And these are our two characters wrestling with, should we go along with what Babylon 5 is doing, or should we go along with Earth? Don't know. We find out.
And we also see Garibaldi lets G'Kar out of jail early as everything is falling apart, which then puts G'Kar in a position to go and talk to Sheridan and to try to kind of get in on whatever Sheridan is up to from G'Kar's perspective.
Yep, it's a nice bargain. I'll send the Narns to help security, but you have to let me basically into the council that you've been building. I know you've been building, but you won't admit it, because G'Kar's been on the station for a number of years now. As he says, he can tell when someone's putting together an alliance around him and not telling him anything. He's got political savvy to realize what's happening, and he's gone through quite a bit in the last few episodes. He's nearly died in an elevator. He's watched the Centauri tear his world to pieces, and G'Kar's ready for, and he's had basically a religious transformation at the hands of a Vorlon. So, you know, he's ready to step up and change his path. And this is a step for him to turning those thoughts and what he's experienced into actual action.
Yeah, I think this is the episode where Delenn remarks that she thinks he's rather not the person she met several years ago.
It's either this one or the next one. Yeah, it's in this set. Yeah,
yeah. I think it may be one down the road, but these kind of do flow together. It was great seeing Major Roddenberry in this again. I remember being very impressed with her when we were doing the rewatch, and then when I was rewatching today. And as I was looking through the notes, she apparently spoke quite highly of the show while it was running, like putting it on a level or close to a level with Star Trek, and kind of granting a lot of kind of approval by proxy, given her role in the Star Trek franchise and around it.
It was a little weird back in the 90s to see her come on the show, because this was on at the same time as Babylon 5. It's like, wait a minute! It's like, I was kind of like gobsmacked, like, really? I did not expect that casting choice. I mean, I'm delighted, but yeah, because there was I have to understand, Sean, back in the day, it was a real rivalry between DS9 and Babylon 5, so this was kind of like jaw-dropping when she shows up in the credits, and I was like, is that right? And then she shows up like, oh yeah, that's Roddenberry's wife, all right? Uh-huh.
Yep, so that's pretty cool. And there is this glorious moment between Londo and Veer after all the prophesying, where they're just completely awkward and paranoid with each other.
It's a delightful moment. Well, I mean, but of course, if you think about it, there's good reason for them to be, because as we learn later, when Londo actually poisons lord, I can't remember the lord.
Rifa.
Yeah, Rifa,
Yeah.
Where he basically says, if we're going back to the old ways, and it's sort of like, well, this makes sense now, in retrospect, why there be some serious concern. Because they both know that if both of them are going to be emperor, one of them is going to die at some point. And the question becomes, like, they're different in age, but they're not that far different. So how does that exactly happen? It could be normal. One of them just gets sick one day and just kindly disappears, or maybe one of the other kills the other. So it's a really lovely, tense, comedic moment, and I do really enjoy when Babylon 5 has those moments where it's still serious, but you can kind of see the humor and irony in it.
Yeah, because in the real world, moments tend to not be all one thing or another, especially not on a long enough time frame. So this makes a lot of sense, and it feels like a very Centauri moment where both of them are reevaluating their relationship to each other or through the lens of their own individual ambition, right? And that kind of Centauri ambition, and it's back on the rise again, like you said, in terms of the old ways. And we also view it in context or in contrast with almost 3 years of seeing the two of them as fast friends, as mentor, mentee, as boss, subordinate. But Lady Morella's prophecy has shaken all of that up, and it hasn't even begun to resettle. Veer makes this move of subordination, of being subordinate by saying, hey, I made Spoo. He, of course, is the first to reach out, and Mollari doesn't take it. But it doesn't feel super cruel in that moment. It just feels more funny and awkward.
Yeah, it's definitely played for laughs. I mean, the body language, the framing of the two shot, yet it's we're definitely supposed to laugh at this awkwardness between two people who have been working together for 3 years and change now. And it also makes an interesting counterpoint to the last episode in this series where the relationship takes a different turn when we find out what Veer's been up to.
Yep.
Oh yeah, that's a really fascinating episode, which I guess I'll shut up about because we're eventually going to come to it. But anyway, this episode I think is a really solid take. I love the development of the Narn. Seeing G'Kar, watching him get out of the jail cell. He's had in a previous episode that development that sort of he's changed. And I thank you, Paul. I think, Paul, you brought this up, the idea that Delenn says that he doesn't appear to be the same man because he isn't anymore. And I'd like to see that actually follows through, and we see that through multiple episodes, including the episode where he helps Delenn with an injured comrade. Right, there is this sense that he has changed his perception of everything, and I love watching him. It's really crazy. The amount of character development for him is really remarkable in this show, because when we first got him, he was just spiteful, kind of mean. He had a sort of dark sense of humor, but he was really not as sympathetic. You understood why he was that way, but it was hard to sort of trust him. But he's become this very trusting figure, and I really love seeing that arc, really, is what it comes down to.
Yeah, I think season 3 is really where the long arc storytelling that Straczynski and the whole Babylon 5 team has been doing really starts to shine in terms of this is how much they can do with this show in terms of where characters can go. And I think there's more and more of that throughout the next few episodes that we talk about. Do we want to jump ahead to Severed Dreams?
Let's do it.
Let's have some space battle.
All right, I can do this one. Again, we're using the Lurker's Guide to Babylon 5 recaps and their overviews, so thank you to them. When President Clark tries to seize control of Babylon 5 by force, Sheridan is faced with the prospect of severing the station's ties to Earth. Delenn receives disturbing news from a ranger, guest starring Bruce McGill as Major Ryan, Kim Miori as Captain Hiroshi, and James Park as Draken. So this is the Act 3 of the 1, 2, 3 of these last few episodes, and it has just a ton of effects shots. Looking through the notes on Lurker's Guide, that's one of the biggest things that Straczynski talked about leading up to and around this episode, was how effects and combat heavy it was. And this was also a winner of the 1997 Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Presentation
Quite rightly so. We finally get everything to come together. The ships appear. We get space battles. We get a heroic moment at the end. We get the breaking of the Great Council. This is what Babylon 5 decides to throw a lot of cards on the table and just start paying some things off finally.
Well, and this is, in fact, where I pulled one of the quotes from last year's intro music.
Yep.
We move now together, not at all, because Delenn, in fact, brilliantly declares that and destroys the Great Council by bringing the religious and labor caste?
The worker
class.
The worker caste.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this episode is a lot of big changes happen in this. It feels like in Night Watch, it's the previous episode, the changes big just from within the sphere of Babylon 5, but this episode feels like all the shit has hit the fan. And all of the changes happening are like, global scale is the wrong term because we're dealing with interstellar space, but you get what I mean, right? There's such massive changes that are sort of reshaping everything.
Yeah, big stuff is moving along several of the major story arcs. Like the Earth Civil War arc is impacting and impacted by the Minbari internal conflict, and both of those are kind of resonating with or kind of spilling out of Shadow's interference, and the way that all of these things have been always interconnected or primed to ripple one into another. And part of that's like because of how the Shadows are operating, right? And the rest of it is because Babylon 5 is this locus, and that anytime there's going to be a bigger conflict, any ripples are going to flow through Babylon 5. Even if these Earth ships weren't coming to Babylon 5, the conflict would come there at some point. This just exacerbates it and makes Babylon 5 even more of a flashpoint.
Well, it becomes even more clear, the episode really reminds us that, Babylon 5 may be way out in the middle of nowhere, basically, but it is, this immensely important thing that exists within Earth Alliance, and so it's not actually safe from Earth Alliance issues from a sort of broader scale, and we see that the second the Mars colonies attack when President Clark just decides, I'm actually going to attack the colonies that have decided not to follow my rule, and he blows up an entire civilian city, Dome City, and presumably kills...
On Mars, yeah.
Yep, presumably kills more than hundreds. Sheridan says hundreds, but I get the impression it's actually more like thousands that he kills.
Yeah, I guess it depends on whether they were able to repair the dome. If that dome lost Atmo, then it's going to be thousands or tens of thousands, depending on the settlement size.
Yeah, it just seems that's what the scene is setting up, but Sheridan says hundreds, so I don't know if he's just downplaying or like he just decided not to do math that day.
Or just a lack of information.
It could also be that, right? Maybe he's just relying on the hundreds that we know have been killed up to that point for various things that Clark has sort of done. That's a possibility.
Yeah, because at this point, flow of information is very limited, and so therefore, like all the exposition that we get in this episode feels more like second and third hand. Like when Captain Hiroshi passes things on, I think it is easy for me to read that as this is something that she heard that now she's passing on, and this is the way that they're all getting information.
Yeah, the news station gets shut down.
Yep.
So there's sort of a deep level of constricting of information. I mean, it's very palpable in the next episodes because we get basically nothing. The closest we get is the post office, which we'll come to in another episode. But yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So can I offer a criticism in this?
Fire away.
I really enjoy this episode because of all of the big stuff that it has. However, this is one of those episodes where I don't know if it's just this was the 90s or if it's Babylon 5 was not a huge show in terms of viewership, and so it didn't have big budget and all of that stuff, so they couldn't get really top talent. But the Major Ryan, I have just decided to call Major Yawn, because level of emotion or any sort of like emoting of any kind in his performance by Bruce McGill, I just found deeply underwhelming. It just seemed like Major Ryan was a character that like either Bruce McGill didn't have time to really work with and kind of figure out, or they just didn't write anything for his character, because it just felt at all moments like he wasn't doing anything with the material he was given.
Yeah, and the character, Major Ryan himself, is also a stand-in. Like, oh, Haig died, so Ryan was the person who took over.
Right.
And I think the character, as performed, feels like he's kind of trying to reach for something, or is a little overwhelmed, but I'm not sure that the actor had or took the time or space. Who knows who specifically who to talk, to lay this on? Is this the actor? Is it the director? Is it the script being rushed because there was so much to get through? I have to imagine that this episode had a much higher than average number of shots and or scenes because there's so much stuff that it's trying to cover. I did like the degree to which Ryan as a character felt like he was out of his own depth, but was trying rather than kind of rolling over.
Yeah, I mean, Bruce Gill has had better performances, and I most remember him in Runaway Jury as the judge. But I think he just had a lack of time to actually really do well by this character. He doesn't have, as you said, not a lot of time to actually put together something. So we kind of get this pastiche, for lack of a better word. And it's doubly ironic because he himself is a stand-in for the actual General Haig. So it's like, it just, I mean, Captain Hiroshi comes off a lot better as a character. We get a lot more sense of who and what she is than Major Ryan.
I just wanted more, is really what it comes down to.
Oh, I've just read, I was reading down in the Lurker's Guide, and apparently General Haig was supposed to show up in this episode, and he bailed on them.
The actor did.
The actor
not General
did.
Haig. General Haig didn't just call up
the
like, by the way, I'm not going to be in your story anymore. I'm going to go write a novel.
Yep. So they basically, he killed off the character and promoted Major Ryan to. And they had booked the actor long in advance. So not McGill, but the guy that they had for Haig. So I guess they were scrambling.
These episodes, especially this one, moves really fast, and it'd be interesting to think about what a version of this episode that's about 5 minutes longer would look like. And I wouldn't add most of that time, or hardly any of that time, maybe to the combat, but instead to the interpersonal, the interactions of the command staff. Because I think if you were going to dig deeper, you could have more complicated relationships between Ryan, Hiroshi, and Sheridan, or somebody on Babylon 5.
Mm-hmm.
Because it seems like Ryan and Sheridan had some kind of, professional extant relationship, if not much of one. And the way I think to add tension or to add texture to this would be to have some other level of a dynamic between at least a couple of the characters, or some triangulation between one of these characters' relationship with Sheridan but then with somebody else. Like, if you had unlikely allies, how does that create a new wrinkle to how this kind of splinter part of Earth Force is going to respond to what's going on? But that's a little bit of, if this were my story, I would blah. I think as is, it does a lot of things. It definitely makes sense to me why it got the attention it did. I'd love to hear from Sean and then from Paul on how the fight scene stuff and the effect shots work for you this time around.
They didn't bother me as much as sort of season 1 did, which I think is a good thing. I don't know if it's because they've updated or they felt better, or I just got used to them. But from an effects perspective, I mean, yeah, they're obviously not like super top notch, quote unquote. Like, and again, I'm doing the finger quotes, but they seem to work really effectively for how they were using them, which I can really appreciate, because I feel like sometimes people use effect shots and they just do it because they want to have an effect, but they don't really know how to use it to be really part of a narrative. And this doesn't feel like that. This felt like every effect shot served a clear purpose in the narrative. And that I can really sort of let go a lot of my sort of snobbery about effects if I'm seeing how it's valuable to plot and story.
Sure. So, I mean, back in the day, I thought, oh my God, this is great. Space battles in space, and it's not Star Wars or Star Trek. This is awesome. This is great. Now I can see this isn't such great technology compared to what we have now. And now even more so, I mean, compared to, like, say, The Expanse. I mean, The Expanse blows away this show in terms of effects, but that's that's a couple decades of technology and advancement. I mean, I noticed how they tried to limit things to make sure that they could actually get it within the capabilities of the technology. I mean, there's lots of close-ups and there's no big, long, wide shots of the battles. We get to see everything close-up battles, close-up fights, punch, shoot, kill. I mean, so they didn't try to overextend what technology they had because, I mean, theoretically, these things should be shooting each other from long range, and we should, in theory, in a remade Babylon 5, though they never will, we would see that, but that's not something that was really within the technology at the time to actually render well. So we get to see much more of instead of seeing an archery contest, we get to see more of a brawl where these ships are really up close with each other, probably more so than they actually would be in real life. But that way, the effects don't look as bad as they might have been if they had tried for something beyond the ambition of the technology at the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's hard for me to imagine a version of this fight that feels as dirty and messy and preventable and regrettable if they were firing from each other at those extreme ranges, which are probably how Space War would / is likely to work.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, this falls well within the range of things that I'm totally willing to forgive because it is a story that is being told. And, we have Ivanova going into the field, which I guess makes sense from a morale perspective. But for me, from a strategic perspective, it's like, send a senior officer into a dogfight when there is just so much, there's so much fire being thrown around.
And so much chaos, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it made sense, like, oh yeah, we have to risk ourselves because we have to be out there. But from a command perspective, it's like you're putting your number 2 in a small fighter? Really?
Yeah, and I think this episode, when I was rewatching it with Meg, what I mentioned was like, I really feel the absence of a commander of the air group type character in this moment. That if we had that pilot POV character like we had in past seasons, or I guess just to season 2,
mm-hmm.
that person could be the camera on the ground level part of that fight. But barring, like, not having that character anymore, Ivanova being that POV character makes sense from a where is the camera standpoint, even if maybe there's some quibbles in terms of does this make sense for the strategy. And she, we stay close to her, but then we see the big, like, ship on ship level things with firing of the batteries and the nose ram by Hiroshi's ship there at the end.
Yeah, I mean, it's like this weird thing in science fiction shows where people in important positions always seem to put themselves in unnecessary danger that doesn't necessarily make sense. I mean, everything from Star Trek, Star Wars does it. I can't think of any Battlestar Galactica does it. Like, all of them do it, and it doesn't. I think it's one of those weird quirks that we just have to accept it because it's for narrative purposes, not necessarily for any sort of logical or consistent world building at all, which is silly, but yeah.
I was wondering whether Star Trek Discovery would do something with that, with like having away teams that didn't involve the captain, since Michael Burnham was not kind of top of command staff. The first season at least didn't, to my memory, do a ton with that, because you ended up with Saru and sometimes the captain being on those as well. So it didn't as much do that thing that you were calling for. For me, that also falls in the realm of these are subgenre conventions that I am willing to accept along with a lot of other people. I think a modern version or inheritor of Babylon 5, of which I think we can argue that the Expanse TV show is, you want to try and figure out how to have other POV characters who are at more of a ground level to be able to provide a broader view of what's going on, and then figuring out how to maintain coherence and how widely you can broaden the cast without losing focus or momentum and things like that. And B5 already has a pretty big cast, because we get through this fight, there's the second wave, and then here comes Delenn with Minbari ships and one of the all-time greatest big battle speeches of the series, which makes me very happy.
He is He is behind me. You are in front of me. If you value your lives, be somewhere else.
Well, and I love the line, the whole line, right, with the bit about only one person has ever won in a battle with a Minbari fleet, and that person's behind me. Take it. And of course, what do they respond? Run! Run away! Run away!
This is also a good reminder, like, oh, right, the Earthships actually don't have any clue how to take out the Minbari. As kind of the new battle lines are being drawn, and that this moment at least is not when those ships wanted to try to be the next Starkiller.
And I think it's really important the other side to this, which is like Delen's actual journey, because I think, was it last season, right? She basically set up her goal, like she was going to lay low and not like try to like provoke the shadows, and like that's what we have to do is like be sneaky. Yeah. We have to be in the shadows, as it were. But by essentially destroying the Great Council by showing up and telling them they're being lazy assholes who are not doing anything, it seems like that is not a very in the shadows kind of behavior. And it seems like at this point, surely the shadows must be aware that the Minbari are now gearing up. But we don't necessarily see that in the next couple of episodes that we're going to talk about. So maybe it comes up later.
This sequence of episodes definitely feels like it's the time when sitting on the fence is no longer an option, even if you were on the fence for a really good reason. You know, Delenn holding back and Sheridan trying to keep Babylon 5 outside of kind of an emergent fascist versus anti-fascist split in the government and so on, that things have escalated, that it's no longer viable to be able to just kind of ride things out or wait things out.
It's interesting that it's this moment that it happens, because before, right, they've done little moves, like they've tried to find some of the original beings, and they've done some sort of behind the scenes stuff, but there's always been this sense of like, so long as Earth Alliance is like watching us, like the human side of Babylon 5 has got us sort of work in the shadows. But sort of like once all that's been taken, I mean, Sheridan basically admits this, right? Like that choice has now been taken away from us. We basically have two options now. And Franklin spells it slightly differently, which is basically we either fight or we like give in. And Franklin's like, well, we either potentially die, or we get court-martialed. And it's sort of, well, we can either give up all the work that we've done, or this is it. The line's got to be drawn now, and let's be done with it. And naturally, they take the line drawing option.
They take the stand. Yeah, they can't compromise or put their hands in the sand.
Yeah, and it very much feels as though this is not in any way ideal, and I mean that in the sense that up until the Minbari sort of show up, it does not feel that Babylon 5 is really going to be able to stay safe, right? It just feels like this is going to be a disaster. And then once the Minbari show up, it sort of is like, okay, there's breathing room, but we still don't get that sense of security, like Babylon 5 will not become a much more harsh target. It just feels like it's a waiting game.
Though Sheridan did not play his other ace in the hole.
True.
With the planet and the Great Machine there.
And I think that's because of the way things had to be rearranged to bring that much more forward earlier in the series than JMS had originally intended. He originally intended that to be way late in the series, when he was just going to have one person, not split it between Sheridan and Sinclair. So he basically had to invent reasons not to have Drawl activate. And I mean, if the Minbari hadn't shown up, he'd have to call in Drawl, because it'd be either that or lose. And I don't think you contend that you basically give up your ace in the hole. But yeah, it's basically kind of like CYAing, because he's kind of rearranged that entire script to make that work. So,
all right, so let's move on to the next episode. Okay, so I'll take this one. This is Ceremonies of Light and Dark. This is described as the Night Watch orders its members on Babylon 5 to target Delenn in an attempt to undermine Minbari actions during the recent crisis. Londo presents Rafa with an ultimatum. William Forward as Rafa, Paul Perry as a sniper, Don Stroud as Boggs, and Kim Strauss as Lynette. Dun dun dun! Very interesting episode.
Like the lieutenant Night Watch guy here is just beyond levels creepy, but also the acting is wonky.
It is a little bit, yeah.
Serial killer kind of wonky sort of feel to both of them, yeah.
Yeah, because of course, what is he? He basically is like, yeah, I once tortured in Minbari for like 7 days, and here's how you do it. And he lists off all the things, and then he sings the song, right?
Yeah. Ugh.
The leg bone's connected to the hip bone.
All right, that's enough of that.
Yes, let's not irreverent our listeners.
And Sean, like you said, here's where we get the counterpunch about the Night Watch thing. That they kind of trick Night Watch and get most of them off the station, but here's this group who are still around, still loyal to Clark, and we don't have to wait too much longer to get the response. It's kind of the first wave of responses after Severed Dreams in terms of the ripples from what they do there. And I think it makes sense here to go from a really widescreen story beat where tons of things change all at once to one very specific response that has pretty big implication, but it's back to here's a small faction, they're trying to do something, it impacts a few characters, they're trying to find what thing and who and where on Babylon 5 is this thing that we need to get to, and then it ends with a PPG fight. I think if this episode had tried to stay really widescreen, it might have been harder to sustain, both budget-wise and in terms of keeping all of these plates juggling at the same pace.
Yeah, I agree. This feels like a really wonderful moment of, we had the wide scale, but pulling it back really sort of gets to the deeply personal. And this is, I think this is important because of so much of what sort of goes into this sequence. The fact that we have sort of Delenn and Sheridan's relationship really sort of becomes deeply more emotional. Like Sheridan loses his crap, right? When the guy throws the knife into Delenn's back and they're all like, we got it. And he just goes full on like John Wick on him, with the exception that he lives, right? He lives at the end of it, but he basically loses it. And it is nice to see that like we've taken it from this wide scale to the deeply personal, the sort of the impact on people rather than necessarily the impact on the sort of broader societal element. It just makes this much stronger. It also makes the performances have so much more impact. I mean, the creepy guy, right? His impact it's not just because he's talking about killing Minbari. He's talking about killing a Minbari that we all at this point should really care about.
Yeah, PC, we've made it personal because we're not targeting random Minbari number 3. We're talking about Delenn here, so that raises the stakes.
And this is the episode. Is this the episode when she does the rebirth ceremony? Or is that the other one?
No, this is the rebirth ceremony, and it nearly gets canceled, but then they have it at the bed, and we get some revelations. Like Lennier loves Delenn, and that's the first time he's admitted that to anybody. Although it's been something that's been kind of clear if you've watched Lennier and all around Delenn for the last 3 years. Like it's not a duh for the audience. It's might be a surprise to the rest of the characters. So the Lennier-Delenn relationship and the relationship, therefore, with Sheridan is an interesting one, especially considering where that goes late in season 5. And I know what Mike knows what I'm talking about, but that's a different thing. So this is an interesting point in that relationship.
Though at this moment, trying to not think about what's come later, I already don't believe how Lennier frames it to Marcus. Like, no, it's a higher, purer love. And like, okay, I don't know that much about Minbari culture because Minbari don't actually exist except for in this universe, but I think you're kind of full of crap.
I kind of think he's sugarcoating it at least a little, if not a lot. I mean, we don't know Minbari culture, but yeah, I think his relationship is a little more earthy his desire is a little more earthy than that, especially because, that just seems way too idealistic and platonic and not very.
It feels more like, there's another moment when Marcus grabs Lennier because he's trying to get Lennier to like basically react the way he wants him to react because Lennier is like super calm. And Lennier's response is to grab him and say, we're not the same. right? You think that we are, but we're not. Brr, 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 brr. It does feel like the love thing and that sort of combine with this sort of latent Minbari superiority that Delenn doesn't necessarily share, but maybe Lennier does. And he just doesn't make it as clear like the frickin' Centauri, who make it very clear how they feel about others.
If you want to think about Apollonian versus Dionysian sort of races, I mean, the Centauri definitely are Dionysian. The Narn can be as well because they're very aggressive and passionate. The Minbari are presented as this sort of purity Apollonian, but it's not, I don't think it is as much as they actually think they are. The same way as the Centauri and the Narn aren't as Dionysian as they say. They have different aspects. I mean, they may lean those ways more and put the humans in the center, but there's aspects of both sides to all the races, and we don't always get to see that well, but if you remember going back all the way to season 1, and we saw all the races getting together and partying, so it's like They all can show off these different sides. They're not as monoculture as you might think.
Right, and we see this even in Lennier when he's talking with Marcus, and then Marcus kind of is interacting with him like a kind of human comrade, and does the hey man, don't go to the thing, and he turns Lennier turns around and does the Vader hold on him.
Right. Yeah, the Force choke, yeah.
Reasserts that cultural difference and the distance between them. And I think part of that is an emotional defense mechanism because he's been really vulnerable, but it's also the show reminding us that the Minbari are more different from humans than in maybe the ways that Marcus was asserting here. So, like you said, Paul, the show does a pretty good job of not presenting the species as entirely one or another stereotype. And I love Londo and Rifa here.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yes, I got there first because we've seen throughout the series, it's been established that Londo he appreciates the Old Republic, appreciates the culture and what they did. So it makes perfect sense that he'd come up with their old ways of doing things. Pulls out the old playbook. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And as he points out, Rifa would do it to him if he had the chance. It's just that Londo was faster on the draw.
Yeah, and Londo kind of has been on the short end of the power dynamic between him and Rifa for a little while, with Rifa teaming up with Morden in the shadows after Londo kind of tells Morden to buzz off. So this is definitely a power play by Londo, as was, you need to come to me this time. I've been going to Centauri Prime. So this is Londo kind of reasserting some power here, and he talks up his contacts in the palace, and he is making moves. He's just been told that he's going to become emperor, so he has every reason to believe that this is all within his grasp.
Yeah, I mean, I think what part of what's interesting is it's also combined with this element where for a lot of the episodes, we're sort of getting this impression that Londo really holds some really disturbing beliefs, and that becomes clear in the episode we haven't talked about yet. I think what's fascinating is that this scene is coupled with him trying to sort of undo some of the stuff that he's already done, but not necessarily to stop the quote-unquote progress they've already received, but rather as a defensive mechanism, because at this point he's sort of lost his faith in, I don't think he realizes they're the shadows, but what is the shadows, right? He sort of realizes that they're dragging us too thin, right? They're having us fight fronts on, I believe he says 12 fronts, right? Fighting a war on 12 fronts, right? And this is making it so we're not capable of actually defending ourselves. And he's actually afraid of the shadows and what they will do. So he uses this moment as a way of doing a corrective, which doesn't quite absolve him of all of the evils he has done, but it's a weird moment because it makes him much more complicated than he maybe was an episode before.
And that's whole part of the Londo story. He is fractally complicated as you go throughout this series, even if you kind of know where he's going to wind up. It's just the whole journey for him and G'Kar, they mostly dive down into complexity and character development together. And this is another interesting beat in that.
Yeah, because one of the best ways to show how a character can be complicated and rounded is to show them interacting with different characters. Not just more Londo Jakar, or Londo Garibaldi. Okay, we're going to bring back in another character that he has a relationship with, and we're going to show how how Londo is reacting to other events in his life, and how these changes are rippling out across all of his relationships. JMS Notes talks about this episode being the exact middle point in the series, and how structurally that was really important to him. You get 8, 9, 10 as this big 1, 2, 3, and then this is a big pivot point, and we see that manifesting in bigger ways and very personal ways with the command staff as they do the rebirth ceremony, talking with Delenn, they hand in their uniforms, and they have their secrets. We get a more kind of literalization of the subtext between Ivanova and Talia, which for the time is much closer to explicit queer rep than basically any show at the time.
Yeah.
From what I remember, I wasn't watching it live. How was that received from your memory, Paul, at the time?
It gobsmacked me. I listened. I was like, I love Talia, and I thought I was going like blink, 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 blink. Did I hear that right? So then when it was reruns and I watched, it's like, oh my god, yes. And it's like since there was such a dearth of that in a lot of television, or especially genre television shows, it's like I never thought. It was sort of like I never thought of that way, huh? It was very, very surprising. I mean, it's like one of those small things, and now in retrospect seems like almost too little, but at the time it was like an enormous sort of admission to even put that out there, because it's not even coded, it's just like there.
And then we get the reveal of the new uniforms.
Oh yeah.
Snazzy black.
Yeah, and they feel kind of Minbari inflected to me as well.
A bit, yeah, I would agree. And it makes sense because that's sort of Delenn's gift, right? And they get their rebirth in the same way. And it makes sense too, I think, because most of them, like Sheridan and Ivanova, right, that the original uniform actually means something to them, but they really can't wear that original uniform anymore. I mean, they've effectively betrayed their government, to be fair, by being betrayed by their government, but
right.
So it really makes sense to have sort of a renewal. We need the authority of the uniform because we're still effectively serving this military diplomatic function. And so having this new uniform feels like they have ascended, they have become anew.
They have become reborn.
I could see an argument on the page or between the characters saying we're still Earth Force. Everybody else is out of bounds. They choose to go the other direction because they're leaning into kind of interconnectivity and this other stuff. It would be interesting to unpack that moment a little bit more, but I think the moves all make sense, especially in how Sheridan talks about his relationship to the uniform following the big fight.
Yeah. When he's talking with the majors, no, I can't wear that for a while. That's the first real sign that this episode is coming, that he's going to just shuck it off for the moment entirely because of what that uniform currently represents, and he can't stand to represent that. And he doesn't, because they've broken from Earth.
Yeah. Well, I think we're good to move on to the last one.
Yep.
Yes, Sic Transit Vir.
Which is terrifying and makes me have all kinds of fist-clenching feels.
Londo introduces Vir to a surprising new acquaintance. A heavy influx of Narns to the station raises suspicions. Carmen Thomas as
Lindisty! Creepy, demonic
terrifying
Centauri.
Centauri.
Oh,
yes.
She's evil.
And talented.
She is such a perfect, Gileadian wife.
Oh god, yes. Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah, well, and so this is a reminder again, right, that Centauri, they don't do marriages the same way we do. It's very status-oriented and all that stuff. And so Lindisty, of course, is betrothed potentially to Vir, although Vir, I believe, says he feels too young. I'm too young to get hitched, I think he almost says. But he cannot resist kisses. So...
No, he cannot.
Can't blame him,
Yeah. And she puts on a pretty strong charm offensive, as does the political officer from a few episodes ago.
Yeah, it unfortunately, it does definitely come off as a mask the deeper into the episode we get, especially as her position on the Narn becomes increasingly crystal clear, which is not just that she didn't like the Narns, or that she just simply thinks of them as a people that are not as good, which is similar to what Londo thinks, right? He basically views them as inferior. But it's way more sadistic. I mean, we've sort of been hinted at the whole time that the Centauri view of the Narn is deeply racist or speciesist, right? But this is the moment when we're seeing like all of the sort of like 1800s rhetoric about other people, basically colonial language just thrown out in explicit terms. I mean, the thing she says about the Narn is it's really hard to watch the episode and not feel really uncomfortable when she talks.
That's absolutely deliberate. You're supposed to go like, It's like she treats as less than chatteling. It's like, oh yeah, some villages we just had to completely destroy. It's like
culling the herd.
It's like she's so cheerful in her species' evil.
Well, and it's even worse than just culling the herd. They're basically practicing eugenics. They're finding quote-unquote aggressive pockets, getting rid of those because then it pacifies the population, as she says. I think what's interesting about this, too, is that it's put against Veer, who we have already figured out, in this episode specifically, is actually a good person because he's trying to help the Narn. That's the other element of this story, is we find out that Veer is effectively created a fake diplomat who is funneling Narns off. And initially they think that he's sending Narns to be murdered in mass, basically genocide. And it turns out, no, he's sending them to other places where they're not going to be killed off. He's trying to save families. And so it's putting him in this awkward situation of trying to maintain his status, technically keep a marriage, and also maintain his moral philosophy. I mean, it's really a tightrope. It's a terrifying tightrope.
Yeah, because he's the Schindler's List type of character in this situation.
Yeah.
With the amazingly named Abraham Lincoln, which is a photoshopped picture of Sheridan, and I forgot how much I loved that.
God.
It's
bad
so perfect.
Photoshop, but it makes perfect sense, because nobody else in the Centauri Republic would have any clue that Abraham Lincoln is a human name, because we've established that Veer is interested in human cultures, so it's like, go Veer.
Yeah, like, why would any Centauri know the name of a prominent political leader from 400 years ago, right?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be like me quoting like somebody who was at the court of Elizabeth I, who isn't the spy master. It's like, it's like, who is this person?
Is there much else to talk about through here? We've got some good comedy. A lot of it is like dramatic irony. We see Veer trying to figure out how to negotiate conflicting emotions, conflicting loyalties, conflicting pressures that are on him across all these axes that we've discussed. And then there's the amusement of the humans discovering Lincoln, Ivanova especially talking about and kind of sharing that character. And, the longer plot beat, we have the more Narns on the station, which then feeds into other things.
And then the humans want to use Lincoln to continue on to try to save Narns. It's like, continue Veer's work, even if Veer's been demoted back to Londo's assistant, which ties in things so he'll be seen in more episodes. That's conveniently that. But so it is a step back for his career, but we do get to have a little more tightness of the two characters back together again.
Yeah, and I will add that this episode started to make me... I mean, I was questioning it before, but it made me... Because it's in the notes, too, from the previous episode. But I didn't really start to question proper until this, which is, can Londo actually be redeemed? Because for me, this episode sort of... It makes the bar for getting there incredibly high. Because while he does not utter the same things as Lindisy does, he does not necessarily make it clear that he disagrees with their position. In fact, he seems to take the same position. He just maybe is slightly more diplomatic in his language. But he doesn't view the Narns as, a real people, right?
Yeah.
He basically calls them. He didn't call them people. I think I don't think he refers to them as chattel like Lindesy does. But it sort of really puts in this really terrifying position, almost like I keep saying terrifying. It's really terrible, awful position because it's almost like a Darth Vader kind of figure who Darth Vader's done all of these great evils and his son keeps trying to save him, but can he actually be redeemed? Or is Vader Anakin when he finally dies and he just admits like, you can't save me. This is the closest I can get to redemption is to look at my son's face. Is Londo going to have that moment where he's sort of, I cannot be redeemed. I have done unspeakable evil, or will he never see it? And for me, I don't know if I want him to be redeemed. I want him to see the error of his ways, but I don't know if he can be redeemed in any satisfactory way based on this episode.
All I can say is spoilers.
So this episode also has a big comedy plot with Londo with the bug, or the bugs.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Which I had forgotten about, and I think is more genuinely kind of almost sitcomedy counterbalance to the more dark comedy of Lindesty's kind of ever increasingly revealed evilness.
Yeah. The comedy of stabbing the bugs does leaven the malevolence of Lindesy. I mean, this is supposed to be a light episode. It's definitely much lighter than the last three, but Lindesty's darkness does seep in. But Londo trying to stab bugs with swords is funny.
Yeah, because he goes and he gets out the dueling sword, and
which we haven't seen since the dueling episode. It's like,
yeah.
Yay!
So it's fun to be able to fold things back in. But otherwise, it's fun to be back in it and to get the payoff of this kind of trio of episodes and see a bit of kind of this is what the range of what the show is now. Like the meta plot is really moving. We've got these changing relationships. We're seeing the character development and the arcs of the characters really manifesting and showing some difference. And it's all really cool.
Yep, it's a show hitting on all cylinders.
Absolutely. Well, I feel like we've got there. We're done.
We're done.
We did a podcast.
We did a whole podcast. Oh my gosh, guys. This is the moment when we're probably going to get like a really important award.
Like Jen will give us a little sticker that says you did a podcast?
Exactly, yeah. I feel like Jen should do that.
I'm holding out for a little star.
Oh my gosh, that would be so cool. A little sticker, like with a star, like 1 gold star for you. Oh.
So everybody get yourselves a fancy bow tie and write an acceptance speech.
Exactly. We will work on that. Well, obviously, if folks want to follow along, you can actually get all of Babylon 5 currently at the moment on Amazon Prime, which is cool. It's not an advertisement for Amazon Prime because we're not going to get any money out of it. But if you happen to have it, you can actually watch it all right now, just in case you don't have the Blu-rays. So if you'd like to follow along with us, next round we will be doing the next 4 episodes, which will be 13 through 17.
13 through 16, starting with the late delivery from Avalon.
That's correct, yes. And this is going to be the order that's on the DVDs, because we didn't mention, but the episode 12 for the season is actually the episode 13 on the DVD. So just keep that in mind. The original release order, we're not following that. We're following DVD order. So, well, thank you guys, Paul and Mike, for coming on and talking and saying smart things with me.
Babylon 5, I'm always up for it, Sean. Always.
It just gets better from here.
All right, folks. Well, on that note, I will just say, Jakar! Sorry, I sneezed. So, awkward ending and see. If you would like to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/SkiffyandFanty or find us on Twitter @SkiffyandFanty, our webpage SkiffyandFanty.com, or you can even send us an email at SkiffyandFanty@gmail.com. The intro music for this podcast was taken from Rock Thing by Creo. You can find out more about their music on freemusicarchive.org.